regimes. And this is all made through NATO, of course. Russia won't tolerate such large-scale manifestations of intolerance and will counteract. We will trace the situation, fix the discrimination acts against Russians, and seek that the government implemented their international obligations. We hope that this report will advance the elaboration of measures to fight discrimination and help to prevent such negative scenarios in the future. But this negative is not a general term. In fact, these statements are intolerable, flagrant manifestations that shame the humankind of the 21st century. And the topic, which today is of concern of many people, is the detention in Poland of the Russian scientist Alexander Butyagin. And we've already made a comment on this, but I can once again repeat, on the request of journalists. I'm talking about the scientist of the St. Petersburg Hermitage, and we believe that the accusations against the Russian citizens and scientists and archaeologists, allegedly, as the accusation says, he is accused of, and I quote, in eliminating the cultural heritage. And I think it's a kind of a pretext by Kiev regime. In fact, he worked in our country, on the territory of our country, Russia. This is highly politicized provocation. It's not a legal case. We will seek liberation of Alexander Butyagin. And this situation once again reaffirms the relevance of our warnings to refuse and to refrain from trips to non-friendly states where our citizens can confront with illegitimate, politically motivated acts by local authorities. And the situation in Ukraine. I will start by saying that yesterday many countries in the West were surprised, and there was a statement by Keir Starmer in the parliament, it was yesterday, where he publicly confirmed the information on the death on the 9th of December of the British military of someone named Hooley. The death of the British citizens and subjects. This is the responsibility of the British government. There is a minor comment. He died in Ukraine. And many people in the UK and in other Western countries wondered, what did he do there? The presence of the British military in Ukraine is no secret to anyone. There's no secret to anyone, to all those reasonable people. We've warned about the provocations in 2022, the provocations by the UK government in Ukraine against Russia. But after 2022, we publicly stated that UK was involved in the conflict, directly involved, and in all the events accompanying it, and their complicity on the side of the Kiev regime, but complicity in terrorist acts committed by the Kiev regime and its henchmen. So this information struck many people in the UK. Once again, the presence of the British military in Ukraine should not be a surprise to anyone. And if we hear such surprise outcries, then this will show that Great Britain is undergoing an outrageous propaganda preventing the truth about their compatriots. So, what's interesting here? We've heard on many occasions from officials in London, not to mention the fact that the subjects of the UK, the military in Ukraine, do their service, but a kind of a restricted duties, including the protection of the diplomatic corps in Ukraine and employing the Ukrainian army, and nothing else. They do nothing else there. But in the statements by Starmer, it was all got right when the authorities publicly announced about the death of their military during the conflict. And the head of the cabinet said that this military helped Ukraine to fight for freedom. And we need to know the details, and we'll find them out. But London should be honest with what he was doing. And I'm talking about this soldier and military, I'm sorry. Maybe somewhere in the UK started to prepare the public opinion to the military losses in Ukraine, the unprecedented number of losses. Indeed, and the government of the United Kingdom will be compelled to speak about this topic with their own citizens. And I know that they hesitate to talk about the crimes, for example, in Afghanistan, committed by the UK. But sometime later, they will have to answer all their requests, including from the law enforcement authorities. What is now being penetrated in the UK media, it's a scenario which was caused by the deployment of the military contingent in Ukraine, but in fact this is the occupation forces. What is interesting here that amid this, the UK mass media, and I quote, "The first British military officer was killed in the Ukrainian conflict." I would like to warn, just in case, the British journalists that it's not the first one. What's interesting, how will the government sort it out? But that's not the first case. This criminal idea with a kind of coalition of desires, the whole responsibility will be put on London. Our position is well known. Any foreign army will be viewed as a legitimate target for the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And let the UK government not lie to its subjects and don't lie about those who are being sent there from the United Kingdom. Those who are sent there, they conduct direct instructions of the UK government in Ukraine. They commit acts of sabotage, terrorist acts, extremist tasks as well. And this is their job. And the mastermind is official London. And now we'll switch to some other aspects. In Ukraine, the Kiev neo-Nazi regime continues to commit war crimes and acts of terrorism against Russia. Within the last week, the Ukrainian shells and drones injured 65 people. 7 died, 58 injured, including 1 child. And I would like to cite some facts. In Belgorod region, On the 4th and 5th December, the Ukrainian drones in Graivoron, Shebekino, Borisivka, in Yekaterinovka, in Belyanka and Volchi settlement districts, the drones injured at least 15 civilians, including the head of administration of the Berezovsky settlement, Mr. Borisenko. On the 5th of December, the Kiev militants attempted an assassination on the head of the Electoral Commission, Mr. Lazarev, with a drone, which attacked his car. Luckily, at that moment, there was no one in the car. The 8th of December, in the settlement Gora Podol, the drone injured a cyclist. In Bryansk region, December the 5th and the 6th, in the settlement Voronok and Mirsky, the drone injured 2 people. In DPR, December the 6th, because of the blast of the GP bomb in Gorlovka, a woman died, injuring a 19-year-old young boy and an 18-year-old girl. In Zaporizhia region, the 5th of December, the building of the Vasilyevsk hospital and an ambulance machine were destroyed. On the 6th of December, the attacks hit of the Vasilyevsk municipal region and injuring 3 people, damaging grid lines and gas pipeline. And a citizen from Vasilyevka suffered from the attack. LPR, on the 4th of December, the drone attacked the Svatovsk Central Hospital. The building is damaged, no one died. One received a blast injury. In Kherson region, in Novaya Mayachka settlement, 2 people died, 2 men, and the elderly woman was injured.
Chuvashia region on December 9th, as a result of a targeted strike by Ukrainian UAV on a residential building in Cheboksar, at least 14 people were injured, including a child. On December 4th, American military correspondent Patrick Lancaster shared with journalists how Russian servicemen rescued his mother-in-law and her husband from the threat of reprisals by Ukrainian armed forces militants during the liberation of Alexeivka village in the DPR on June 12th, 2024. According to the woman's testimony, foreign mercenaries and Bandera supporters shot at civilians, beat her and burned her house. Earlier in 2014, she had already lost her home in Donetsk as a result of shelling by the armed forces of Ukraine. And of course, all these crimes will be punished. All the criminals will be punished. Russian law enforcement agencies continue to work to bring Ukrainian war criminals to justice. The Prosecutor General's Office of Russia has approved the indictment of 41 representatives of the political and military leadership of the Kiev regime in the criminal case on the genocide of the population of the DPR and LPR. Among the accused are Arsen Avakov, Andrei Yermak, Vasily Maluk, Petro Poroshenko, Alexander Syrsky, Alexander Turchinov, Denis Shmygal, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, and others. As a result of punitive operations carried out in Donbass on the orders of these individuals, since 2014, nearly 5,000 civilians have been killed, 18,500 people have been injured, and more than 13,500 people have been wounded. 1,275 of those are minors. Partially or completely, they've destroyed more than 153,000 civil infrastructure facilities, including approximately 138,000 residential buildings, 1,565 educational and 847 medical organizations and institutions, 1,403 social facilities, manufacturing commercial enterprises, at least 11,500 life support and public utility facilities, 505 cultural institutions and sport facilities, 205 religious buildings. The accused have been placed on an international wanted list for war crimes in the Kursk region. Captured Ukrainian armed forces militants Alexander Zherebno and Artem Chibisov have been sentenced to long terms of imprisonment, 16 years each. 22 years in prison were given as a sentence to Sebastian Zaykin and Valery Yermenko, who shot 2 civilians in Mariupol in March 2022. And they're doing all of this for someone's money, using someone else's arms in their own hands. On December the 3rd, during a meeting in Brussels of the foreign ministers of NATO countries, Norwegian Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide announced the allocation, jointly with Germany, Poland and the Netherlands, of 2 additional aid packages to the Kiev regime, totaling $500 million as part of the alliance's so-called List of Ukraine's Priority Needs initiative. And what's most amusing, just look at the bankruptcy cases in Germany. Isn't that money more needed by the Germans in order to continue to live, to develop and ensure their security and so on? No. This money has been ordered to be given to Bankova, 2 new bloody corrupted schemes. One will be stolen and the lesser part will be used to continue to kill Ukrainian civilians. Taking into account the 2 previous tranches totaling $835 million, under this mechanism, Norway has become the leading sponsor of the war. As noted by Polish Minister of Defense Sikorski, the aforementioned $500 million will be used, among other things, to purchase anti-missile systems for Ukraine for American Patriot air defense missile systems. On December 5th, Swedish Minister for International Cooperation and Foreign Trade, Benjamin Duse, announced his ministry plans by 31st of August 2026 to reduce financial aid to Tanzania, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Liberia, and Bolivia. And for what exactly? Perhaps Sweden is concerned with the issues of their own population. Not at all. I have to take it in quotation marks. This saved up money that was first and foremost promised to the countries that really needed it, because colonialism was rampant there. All that money, that is approximately $170 million, to Bankova. Did you hear? Zelensky ran out again, so they need to refuel him. And at the same time, Stockholm even intends to close the embassies in at least 3 of the countries mentioned. And why exactly? Because they need to send even more money to sponsor killings of Ukrainian citizens. They will do anything in order to support the corrupted Kiev regime. And why? Well, probably because the Bankova regime has been hinting to all the sponsors that they have information about their real involvement in their affairs. That's how they've covered for terrorist acts and extremists, how they've stomped on the very definition of human rights, freedom, and democracy, sponsoring killings by the Kiev regime of those they consider their own citizens. The prohibition of the language that is the maternal language for millions, and other signs of inhumane treatment. And of course, once again, there is the pertinent issue of the presidential elections in Ukraine. How is that going to go? You see, even the US President Donald Trump mentioned to Politico on December 8th this year that the Kiev regime, direct quote, is using the war to avoid holding elections. That's just admitting the obvious. Another quote, I think now is the time to hold them. The Ukrainian people should have that choice. They have been talking about democracy for a long time, but this is no longer democracy, said Mr. Trump. On December 10th this year, Zelensky responded by stating his readiness for elections, conditional. Can you imagine? He's even posing conditions, conditional on the elections being held during martial law with the introduction of appropriate amendments to the current legislation of Ukraine, as well as the United States and Europe ensuring the security of the electoral process. Can you imagine? I am surprised that Mr. Zelensky did not demand that Brussels or the European Commission to change the law of European states so that he could have more comfort in holding the elections in Europe. That's unprecedented. That in order to hold the elections in a sovereign state, in an independent state, they followed the demands of other sovereign states to provide for such conditions. I would understand if there was such call for assistance for the much loved by the West and the Kiev regime to the OSCE that is aimed at controlling the elections, or other monitoring organizations and structures specializing in observing, who are supposed to assist, fix, and perhaps provide assistance on request of certain states. That would be understandable. But I can hardly imagine if they had enough audacity, but they probably would have enough audacity to ask for money for these elections. Perhaps that's still coming, considering the sums they've already received. Perhaps that's enough to print the papers with boxes to tick them during the election. But to demand from their own mentors, from sovereign states, to provide these conditions in Ukraine to hold the elections, that's something totally unprecedented. Zelensky clearly wants to remain in power, that's clear, but at the same time, no one has any doubt that he has zero chance of being legally re-elected. He can only win by using the very well tested by the West so-called Moldovan scenario involving voters from among representatives of the Ukrainian diaspora living in Europe, the US, Canada, and other countries. That's the international carousel that has already been tested. Under the watchful eye of Sandu. Perhaps something similar or something improved is planned by Zelensky in order to use it in the Ukrainian territory. According to available information, Zelensky discussed this option at a meeting with the head of the World Congress of Ukrainians, recognized in Russia as an undesirable organization, Paul Grod, during his stay in New York in September this year, at the high-level week of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. When addressing his compatriots, he presented the task with conducting an audit of ethnic Ukrainians living abroad to assess their loyalty to the Kiev regime. As a result, proposals should be prepared to strip individuals who criticize Zelensky of their citizenship, and measures should be taken to prevent pro-Russian or opposition-minded compatriots from voting. Is it clear what Zelensky wants from the West? He wants to hold the elections, not as generally understood. He is not interested in elections in Ukraine. He is interested in being re-elected. And in return, the World Congress of Ukrainians was promised increased funding and other kinds of support. I believe if they agree to that, day will come when Zelensky will incorporate it into voting points abroad, as well as the inscription points, in order to get re-elected and start another mobilization for his population, as he likes doing it, trying to kill everyone. At the same time, all this horrible, terrible things happening in Ukraine is no longer ignored. Someone starts speaking timidly, others more bravely. What Western experiments in Ukraine have led to. On December 8th, Luxembourg's Minister of the Interior, Leon Glodden, stated in an interview on the Paper Jam website, that was a direct quote, "I know that over many months, the number of Ukrainian refugees arriving in Luxembourg under temporary protection has been steadily increasing. This phenomenon is characteristic of the whole of Europe. As the conscription age is lowered, more and more young people are fleeing Ukraine. And as a human being," said the Minister of Luxembourg, "I understand them. However, there's a sense of strangeness, because on the one hand," said the representative of Luxembourg, "we're sending weapons and money to Ukraine so that it can defend itself. And on the other hand, people are fleeing from there. So we have to decide either one or the other. It won't work to do both. End of quote. So gradually, perhaps at a different speed, but they're finally getting the idea that the arms and money they keep supplying to the Kiev regime are not exactly reaching the target. And the people who Zelensky uses to hide as a pretext when asking for money and arms for the West have no desire to fight whatsoever. And the only way to combine the arms they receive with these people is to start the conscription forcefully. So someone in the West is finally starting to guess the true nature of this scheme. Maybe not guess, but just voice it aloud. And it is unclear whether this statement is intended to prepare public opinion for the curtailment of aid to Ukraine or for the cancellation of temporary protection status for men of conscription age. However, it's obvious that 6 months ago it would have been unthinkable to hear anything like this from a member of the government of Luxembourg. They used to repeat as a mantra that this is the moment of truth on the protection of rights of Ukrainian citizens, and the Luxembourg authorities have consistently made a bet on nothing but supporting Kiev at any price as much as necessary. And now, bit by bit, as they understand exactly where Ukraine has been led, actually they don't care for that, where they have led themselves, and whether Ukraine is pulling them, and that is the very bottom. Now, there are very careful attempts of asking questions. Meanwhile, Ukraine is showcasing the growth of Nazism, evidence of the commitment of modern Bandera followers to Nazi and basically satanic ideology continues to multiply. On December 6, Ukrainian public figures published a message about the installation of a memorial sign in Uzhhorod to the 128th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, with its chevron placed on the pedestal with the emblem of the Wehrmacht, 1st Mountain Infantry Division Edelweiss, and 2 crossed Hotzel axes. After analyzing the social media accounts of the members of the volunteer unit of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Freker, operating in the Kharkiv direction, journalists discovered that they are followers of Satanism and neo-paganism. In photos posted online, the militants pose with the corresponding symbols and attributes. And this is yet another testament to the neo-Nazis' commitment to misanthropic ideology. And I've already mentioned a few words, but we continue to speak about this regularly on the mobilization campaign in Ukraine and on the lowering of conscription age. Zelensky's regime is pursuing a policy of tightening the mobilization campaign. On December 2nd this year, Fyodor Venislavsky, member of the Verkhovna Rada, announced that parliamentarians intend to return to consideration of the bill on repressive measures against draft dodgers, which did not receive support in 2024. In particular, they propose that Ukrainians who fail to report to those centers of conscription or who leave military units without permission should have their bank accounts blocked and be prohibited from driving. To be fair, I believe this should be labeled as the warming up of what we've seen in reality, because they get beaten up to death, especially those who do not want willingly to lay their lives. Further, Venislavsky made it clear that in the interests of returning territories, measures are being developed to involve the population, including women, in national resistance and universal military training. It is no surprise that against this backdrop, the Kiev regime's attempt to lure young people into contract service in the army resulted in failure. On December 1st, Reuters reported that only a few dozen volunteers, so-called volunteers, had joined the ranks of the armed forces. They have no desire to fight, but no one is listening to them. neither the Ukrainian mass media nor the Western ones, the people of Ukraine, would speak their truth if they were given the chance. They've understood how they were led astray, how they were led into this bloodbath. Perhaps it's hard to admit, but it's clear they no longer want to fight. They understand that they were sold, they were betrayed in the most horrible, disgusting way, because they were lied to when they were promised peace. And they did not follow it blindly, but that's what they signed their names under by choosing the absolute non-professional Zelensky. They had nothing in mind but peace, perhaps equal rights in the society. These simple headlines he used, that we should live fairly, we should work, everyone has the right to speak their own language. Those are the general ideals and values. That's what they've responded to in Ukraine back in the day. How he was on his knees in front of Ukrainians, apologizing for the crimes of previous leaders. I don't even know exactly what he has to do now in order to apologize for the crimes. First of all, in front of his own Ukrainian people, and all these results, as they say in Ukraine, of attraction to the contract service or mobilization, it's nothing but an outflux of population in Ukraine that speaks of nothing but the fact that the Ukrainian people finally realized what has been done to them. Those who claim to be their mentors, their representatives, hide their relatives and children as far as possible, putting them in Germany, in the UK, the US, Canada, and so on. Just take a look. It's all clear in exact examples.
Nothing is said without confirmation by digits, references to the quotes, and so on. So 11 contractors, from which 4 were injured. This is 36%. 3 left, disappeared, and 18% went a wall, and one, I'm sorry, but one person committed a suicide, and this is 9%. Can you imagine that? That's the report of their work and the report on attracting to civil service, to the contract service. The manpower shortage for the Kiev regime can become much more worsening. What can be more deteriorating? In accordance with the statistic report of the United Nations released on the 5th of December, on October 13th and 14th November, about 130,000 people fled Ukraine compared to the previous 9 months, and 166,000 persons. Most of them are young people aged 25 and younger. And I think that the response is one. They love Ukraine. They want to speak Ukrainian. They know Russian and Ukrainian. What's the reason? No. They are patriots, but what makes them flee? I think they don't want to die. No, they are ready to die, but they do not want to become victims of Zelensky's corruption. They do not want to die for the Zelensky and the whole Hill family and all his closest allies and friends filled up their pockets. That's what they do not want to see. That's why they flee. We can talk a lot about that. There is, if you love your country, you go and defend its interests. But it's not about this. The matter is that the citizens of Ukraine woke up to the idea that they were betrayed in a very flagrant way, and no one on the bunker is going to stop. And the population is becoming more and more discontent with forced mobilization. People show hatred towards the military units, to the policemen. They even try to fight in order to liberate their recruits. They hit the cars of the so-called territorial center for recruitment. Very often they use cold and sometimes light weapons to liberate the recruits. Yes, for us, we view them as opponents and rivals. And there is no doubt that we will fight for our soldiers and for our people, but we see that the citizens of Ukraine have already made their choice. They show and say publicly that they are ready at any means, especially in view of the fact that they won't be able to say it in public, to say that they do not tolerate such an attitude from the regime of Zelensky, which occupied Ukraine. And he is not alone. It's not just a group of Zelensky, plus Medic and his allies. I refer to all those who unleashed coup d'etat and then bloodiest massacre in Ukraine, the political elites of the West, who fill up their pockets at the expense of Ukraine for over several years. But the Zelensky regime doesn't stop. He does it under the guise of the benefit for Ukraine. And how can he prove it? Only eradicating the Russian language in order to consolidate his position in the society. The language terrorism in Ukraine is gaining momentum, targeting the most vulnerable citizens, children. In late November, a teacher from the White Church complained in social media that the kindergarten which her son visited, there was a girl who spoke Russian, and the so-called teacher, if we can name her a teacher, discriminates, came to the kindergarten and started bullying the child. And this case was brought to public, she said that the girl was speaking incorrectly and then asked the teacher to correct the child. And what is more important and scary, that this deed was supported by the ombudsman, the language ombudsman, Yelena Ivanovskaya, saying that the kindergarten, likewise school, this is a space where a child should be brought up as a Ukrainian. And that's ridiculous and scary at the same time. When I was a little girl, I went to the kindergarten in our embassy, the embassy of the Soviet Union, and the kindergarten was international. Likewise, the school. And many other children from other countries visited this kindergarten, including Cuba, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, back then this country existed, the Polish children from various countries. A real international class and group in the kindergarten. And right now I'm struck by the idea that if anyone could have said back then that the kindergarten or a school, this is a space where a child should be brought up in some ethnic minority, as a representative of some ethnic minority. No way, there was no way for that. There were evenings, holidays, and just kind of performances on the occasion of the New Year. Different events were hosted in the kindergarten for all the kids. And back then, for the kids from the Soviet Union, and right now for the kids from Russia, the ethnic and cultural diversity has always been highlighted. There was an opportunity for featuring their cultural identity. And right now in Ukraine, we are seeing that kindergarten and the school are now places to bring up Ukrainians. But if it turns out that this kid is of other nationality, so what's the way out? But they answered. They just overnight included all Russia-speaking citizens into non-Ukrainians, so they rule the destiny of children of other nationalities. That's not a kind of a person who is This was committed by a person, official representative of the government of Ukraine. Of course, we can admit some mistakes. They could have said that everybody misinterpreted the situation, or just admit the fault, or just try to correct it. But here we don't see any acts. This is a nationalist policy, what we are seeing in the government of the Kiev regime. Another cynical example with a girl who was deprived of the present on the Saint Nicholas Day because of speaking Russian. But back then these posts were deleted and the local authorities denied this fact. But I don't know whether this happened or not, but the matter is that these cases are quite often. There are no specialized programs. No one knows about such cases that would investigate on how many people want to speak Russian language or other languages. But unfortunately, they do not have not even an opportunity, but even bullied for this. But in due account that discrimination of the Russian-speaking population is a systematic policy conducted by Ukraine, dictated from above, such cases, some of them, let me repeat, are confirmed, others are refuted, but everyone knows that this is a part of the current policy of the Ukrainian government. And what's the most absurd and striking topic, it's the case with the abducted, as they put it, children from Ukraine. Yelena Zelenskaya on international fora advances the topic that it's a kind of invented story on abducted children, Ukrainian children, describing their sufferings, their occupation, that they're being deprived of their self-identity. In fact, the main enemy of all Ukrainians, including the minor, this is the anti-people regime of Zelensky and him personally. So the tutors, bloggers, the so-called linguistic activists bully and insult the Russian-speaking children with impunity, labeling them as incorrect and requiring and demanding on somewhat correction, and this is the Nazi ideology. This is the replacement of the language identity, forced replacement. The representatives of the battalions Azov, Aidar, Kraken screw up children, teaching in some summer camps the children to hate the Muscovites and conducting monstrous psychological experiments, making kill pets, their own pets. in order to incite the lowest feelings in children. And that's the kind of identity imposed by the regime, the Zelensky regime. It's not a regime, it's indoctrination. That's what they are doing, but blaming the others. The Bankovaya tries to conceal their own crimes against children, but the facts are telling, and you cannot hide the truth. Last week there was an outrageous, high-profile case associated with the Yelena Zelensky Foundation, who in spring 2022 organized the kind of humanitarian evacuation to Turkey, a group of miners from Dnipropetrovsk. And I remember quite well this event. Now journalists received a report of the delegation of the Ukrainian ombudsman, UNICEF, and the Turkish ombudsman, who in 2024 made a monitoring visit in order to check the living conditions of the evacuated miner, those who were saved. And it all ended up by the following. It turned out that many children which were saved by Madam Zelensky became victims of psychological and sexual harassment. They were deprived, they didn't taken care of, they didn't have a chance to teach, they were filmed in propaganda videos, they were starved and humiliated. And what is striking, that 2 girls came back to Ukraine pregnant. Good summer holidays. Great care of the Kiev regime over the children. Do you think whether anyone was brought to justice for these crimes? One of the teachers became now a teacher of physical culture, and that's it. On December the 10th, it became known that a criminal group was revealed which illegally deported Ukrainian children abroad. 25 minors were already victims, fell victims. 13 of them have been already sent to foreign states. To circumvent the ban for interstate orphanage and custody, they take fake contracts, they faked programs, engaging corruption ties at the high level. And I think Van Zelensky was involved in this case. Without support from the above, this group would have failed. And the only thing I would like to say here, that we have sent many requests to them, calling for providing some numbers about the alleged abducted children. We've asked them on many occasions to confirm the data with the figures. In fact, on international fora, Ukraine outcried that it's about 100 million, or at least hundreds people. But then the number were changed. But in fact, they speak about 1,000 people. But we knew only about 139 children. And a lot of information was unconfirmed as a result. And all those whose information is being revealed, this work is going on in order to confirm this. The evidence that was provided by Ukraine is not a real evidence. They exacerbate and go into hyperbole, saying that the number was much more. All those children who were sold, abducted, Indeed, there are thousands of them, and the citizens are aware of this fact. They know these children, the families, and in order to avoid any answers, to avoid answering the question, where are the children, the Kiev regime invents an idea that these abducted children, that they end up in Russia. But in fact, that's not the case. In fact, these children are in the Western Europe, in the neighboring states, the states neighboring to Ukraine. They were deported with the help of Ukrainians. These children are not in Russia. The Bankovaya Street needs these numbers in order to explain its own citizens the destination of all these child abducted, but Russia has nothing to do with these abductions. Neither human rights organizations nor leaders of Western countries or NGOs don't pay any attention, do not concern about the destiny of the child. There were a lot of examples. No coalition has been established for their return. The International Criminal Court has not issued an arrest warrant for Yelena Zelenskaya and other criminal groups. This silence says that neither Kiev regime nor its Kiev curators, are interested only in one thing. The first, to distort attention from the battlefield and to hide the real success of Russia. They are seeking to explain to their own citizens the location of the Ukrainian children, bullying and trying to make both citizens fight.
The Yelena Zelensky Foundation earns money by holding presentations of its projects in Western capitals with the participation of political elite and Hollywood stars, while the children's issue is used on the international stage for anti-Russian propaganda, so it's convenient. They can earn money and explain to everyone everything. And it is in this context that the UN General Assembly resolution Return of Ukrainian Children, adopted on December 3rd this year, which is based on lies and slanders, should be viewed. Those who voted for it are effectively covering up the crimes of the Kiev regime against children. And there were also those who did not have the courage to vote against this libel, although many are well aware of the implausibility of anti-Russian insinuations. Our country has always been committed to ensuring the rights and interests of minors, and we call on sensible states not to be taken in by the lies fabricated according to the patterns of Bucha. And no, it's not a coincidence, not just to fall prey. It's true. Just do not buy the lies. It's the same patterns they use with Bucha, Izum, and other staged events. You have to believe only the facts. And we have nothing to hide. We're open, and we're open when it comes to talking about children. And the responsible for the children's rights, Lyubova Belova and her colleagues, work around the clock, always timely responding to any incidents, any information, any data that appears. But Ukraine also continues to glorify traitors that is connected with the diversification. On December 4th, Ukrainian media reported on the decision taken by the Kiev City Council to rename a number of streets as part of a policy of diversification and glorification of traitors to the Ukrainian people. The Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, where a monument, as we've already mentioned, to Ivan Mazepa was recently erected, is now located on the street named after him. Formerly, the street was called Lavrska Street. Why exactly is the Lavra no longer suitable? Why was Lavrska Street no longer suitable for the location of Lavra? Or they will also rename the Lavra to Mazep as well. That wouldn't be a surprise. Makarenko Street was renamed after the Sheikh Mansour Battalion of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Makarenko is no longer Ukrainian, or what? And Suvorov Street was renamed after Ukrainian nationalist member of the OUN-UPA Ludmila Foa, Marshal Rokossovsky. Was renamed after the Pavlichka. Another street was renamed after Pavel Pavlichenko, and the Levitan Street was renamed into Lukretska Street because of the Lukrets Lake. The street of Dunayevsky, of the Tsundurovska Street. I'm just wondering, why exactly is Levitan answering for that? For what exactly? I'd like to just understand the logic. Is something wrong with Levitan's nationality? And the street of Suleiman Stelsky of Dagestan's poet was renamed as well. Everyone knows who Suleiman Stelsky is. And you can easily know as well, looking into his poetic heritage. Who is Igor Yukhnovsky? I can give you a hint. He is a public figure who, during the crumble of the USSR, joined the nationalists and headed the infamous National Memory Institute that is trying to propose Ukrainian globe. And now he's a hero, apparently. It's quite symbolic that Petro Poroshenko's European Solidarity Party office has been registered on Ivan Mazepa Street, and the historical pseudo-heroes and current political figures are completely consistent with each other. All the facts that I've mentioned confirm the relevance of the tasks of denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and the elimination of threats emanating from its territory. All these goals will definitely be achieved, as has repeatedly been mentioned by the representatives of the Russian Federation. That is not everything. I would like, since we've talked about those who finance this terror, the slowing down of terms of the global growth is usually tied with the tariff offensive started by the US. And I would like to state that according to the International Monetary Fund, the GDP growth did not supersede a few percent. According to it amounted to 3% for 2025, 3.2. And one of the deciding factors is the indecisiveness, which aggravated the situation in the global affairs, are the consequences of the unilateral limitations introduced by the West and restrictive measures towards the Russian economy. Let's see who they stroke first. They stroke international production supply chains. They disbalanced the investments and trade chains. They've aggravated the debt problem and lowered for many countries access to goods, services, finances, technologies. And it's worth pointing out that the negative effects are continuously felt by those who use them in their own geopolitical interests. The growth of economy of developed countries, according to the IMF, in 2024 did not supersede the level of 1.8%. As for 2025, it's 1.6%. Especially difficult situation is the situations of the old world order. Since 2022 to the first half of the year of 2025, the volume of economic losses of the EU after the anti-Russian sanctions is amounting to 1 to 1.6 trillion euros. And the lacking behind of the potentially possible growth keeps growing of countries like Germany, France, Italy, and the Euro Commission states that the main areas of their action continues to stagnate. And we will remind you that even the European Commission has to admit that suspension of energy cooperation with Russia does not allow leading production of Europe to preserve their compatibility. And by refusing Russian energy sources, they refused to talk about what will lead for them. It led to the growing prices for energy sources and more expenses for the energy import. Last week we've paid attention to this issue. European Union, according to the Eurostat data, since introducing sanctions against Russia, overpaid for the blue oil about 200 billion euros, and according to Russian experts, actually it's 750 billion euros. But let's look even at the figures that they've presented. It's already clear from that alone the dynamic that we're witnessing. In the energy crisis and policy of non-thought-out decarbonization is leading Europe to deindustrialization, along with high prices on energy carriers. They've also missing another eliminations by denouncing mutually beneficial Russian partnership that brought a lot of benefits and chances of long-term development after the closure of airspace for Russia. Their carriers faced lower competitiveness as for the heightened length of flights in the Asian direction, and the European timber industry that was oriented in the production of the wood industry of Russia. Due to the lack of Russian timber, it led to the growth of prices and the lower competitiveness of their products. And for Finland, which was traditionally in close cooperation with companies in this area, by cutting off ties with Russia, a lot of profiled companies and companies went bankrupt. As a result of 2024, GDP lowered by 0.1% and inflation reached 8.4%. And a very important point, that is not about the countries towards which illegitimate, aggressive, destructive policies being implemented. No, those are the countries enforcing this policy towards others. They are the ones showing these results. Can you understand the absurdity of the situation? So all the losses are just the tip of the iceberg for the economic bargaining of Russia. Long-term consequences remain to be not counted or assessed, but to be felt for real. But we also have good news. On December 13th, we celebrate 20 years of the joint declaration of the Developed Comprehensive Partnership of the Russian Federation and ASEAN states. That was signed by our leaders at the first Russian-ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur in 2005. This document decided the very important area of development of our connections with the association, as well as laying the basic principles and orientations of the Russian-ASEAN relations. And the 35 years of our bilateral relations will be celebrated next year. And because of this event, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lavrov, sent the well wishes to our ASEAN colleagues. We especially point out the input of Malaysia, which was the president in ASEAN in 2005, as well as our Singapore coordinators of Russian-ASEAN dialogue in preparing and adoption of the joint declaration, which truly decided our partnership and allowed it to reach a strategic level at another summit in Singapore 2018. Association remains our ally and strong partner, and despite the external pressure, we not only preserve the positive dynamic of relations, but we also continue to develop mutually beneficial cooperation that will allow us to fully implement the potential of Russian-Asian cooperation. We've received a lot of questions to comment on the situation on the Thailand-Cambodia border. Russia has traditionally been tied of traditionally friendly and cooperation relations with Thailand and Cambodia, which is why we're seriously concerned with another escalation of the offensive at the border between these two friendly states of Russia by using arms. We ask both states to follow the deterrence in order to avoid civilian casualties. We call for a ceasefire and to fully resolve the conflict, including the articles of the joint declaration that was signed on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur on October 26th. We call on both states to resolve the conflict with peaceful measures. We have to constate that the territorial disagreements are the result of the long-term colonial policy of the West. We have to follow the spirit of unity and solidarity in order to overcome historical disagreements. And of course, I have no right but to follow my own calling and your calling and to comment on my favorite topic of highly likely. On October 4th, the UK published another tom of the comic detective, but I have to say what it's called. A 178-page final report on the public investigation of the death of a British citizen, subject of this country, Don Sturgis, in July 2018. Yes, that case in Amesbury where supposedly after the poisoning substance Novichok that occurred. As we supposed from the beginning, this was a court process, and please do not succumb to temptation and believe that in a public investigation there's any publicity. It's the exact opposite in the British. It's all behind the closed doors. This quasi-court process was started and was used by the British establishment in order to preserve in the public opinion the baseless anti-Russian version of the events, according to which the death of Ms. Sturgis is directly tied with the Skripal's affair, is another provocation around the former employee of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Julia in March 2018, where in Salisbury, which is a neighboring town of Amesbury, it happened. And it's hard to say exactly what happened, because Britain's version, this is the version of tabloids that was fed by British officials, but what truly happened remains a secret, where they are, what happened to them. But we were also told about Novichok and so on and so forth. So the order of the British court was pretty obvious, but it's still senseless. All the responsibility automatically, without any kind of rebuttal, is laid on Russia or on the so-called agents that supposedly acted from the personal approval of the President Putin. And at the same time, London announced the introduction of sanctions against the General Office of the General Headquarters of the Armed Forces of Russia, and supposedly 11 Russian citizens tied to it. They needed a pretext, you got it right, to start another anti-Russian story, hysteria campaign, whatever you want to call it. All these myths, Amesbury, Salisbury, whatever they've cooked up. There are long-term resources that is being strained out in time, that is used by the Britain in order to glorify or explain whatever they plan to do against Russia or their own citizens even. And of course we reserve the right for countermeasures. To further showcase the cynicism of the situation, I'd like to remind that the British authorities refused any kind of cooperation with Russian relevant agencies in investigating the incident, including the samples of the substance that they claim was used to poison Skripals, and then Ms. Sturgis died from. Russia's embassy in London sent to the Foreign Office over 60 diplomatic notes with a large list of questions. And most of those remain without an answer. And most of those just received a classical write-off. We could also remind that how English knocked on the doors of all the EU member states, and without any proof stated, or what they claimed to be the evidence, and it was published on mass media, turned out to be a PowerPoint of a first grader. It just stated they did it because they could do it and because they've already done it before. Who did it? What are the details? What was used? What is it called? What kind of laboratory research was done? No information. Just a few arrows. There were from 5 to 10 slides. Just a school PowerPoint. And not in order to educate, but I mean a school PowerPoint where elementary students prepare a PowerPoint. And then, when this PowerPoint was shown in the British Embassy here, forwarded this PowerPoint to their colleagues from other embassies, a lot followed London's lead, although others decided not to do it. But in private, we asked those who joined that action of sending the Russian diplomats on the expulsion of Russian diplomats. So supposedly we've poisoned them. So we decided to find out why the Russian diplomats were sent away. The Nord Stream was blown up, and now serious people in the Western Europe courts are stating that those were Ukrainian diplomats. Why are they not using terms of expulsion for Ukrainian diplomats? So in private, we asked those who joined that act of sending out of Russian diplomats, did they receive any kind other than 10 slides, any substantive evidence other than public statements of London, as you perfectly remember, in the style of highly likely?
Theresa May was in hysteria, and we were answered no. A lot of time passed. We didn't have any information. In the special NATO labs, they didn't reveal this information. This is another lies of Great Britain, the lies to its own allies. A politicized and non-transparent character of this so-called public investigation proves that London was not interested in a just and unbiased investigation. The special services of the UK and politicians of all kinds are striking and jungling with these anti-Russia examples of Russian aggression. And the UK started to wind up the sanction mechanism, blaming Russia with arsons and other terrorist acts. And I think this was masterminded with the main purpose to inflict damage on the international standing of Russia, inventing some other myths about the leadership of Russia. The timelines is worth mentioning. London right now is thinking over how can it meddle in the peaceful process. What else can be done to discredit Russia's efforts? Right now, the UK is wondering why the government does not support peace processes. And I wonder why the UK doesn't vote for the efforts and support the efforts of the overwhelming majority of the United States. And the only answer is we cannot support Russia because Russia was doing bad things with us. It's a very simple fake game, but for a long-term basis. No justice reigns in the UK. There was an interesting chain of events and protests and demonstrations in terms of civil society, foreign ministry. On the 5th of December, the National Center held a fifth forum, We Are Together, and the meeting was held in the International Association of Volunteers and Non-Profit Organizations, Kindness. The initiative was submitted by volunteers of CIS and supported by the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. The establishment of association is lined up with the declaration by the UN of the International Year of Volunteers. The participation in the session of these volunteer organizations was attended by representatives of Brazil, India, Kazakhstan, Russia, of course, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, South Africa. The initiative became a result of a multi-year efforts of making this space of volunteering. It reflects long-term partnership between non-profit organizations, and the main mission of the association is to strengthen international humanitarian cooperation between public associations and NGOs of other friendly states. This association will make it possible to share experience, hold joint educational workshops, and take decisions that can advance non-profit sector both in each country and in...
Пятый год подряд, опять же, к работе ее оргкомитета подключается руководство секретариата совещания по взаимодействию и мерам доверия в Азии. В этом году в состав жюри входила заместитель генсекретаря этой структуры Джан Лин. Она принимала участие в церемонии награждения победителей в анимации «Код милосердия». иностранных вузов, профильных зарубежных структур, кафедр действует 50 таких русских центров и 24 кабинета русского мира, а также 48 секций русскоязычной художественной учебно-методической литературы. В текущем году, накануне визита президента Российской Федерации в Индию 15 ноября, был также официально открыт первый русский центр на земле Индии, напомню, в штате Керала, города Тривандру. И одна историческая тема, дата, которая является чрезвычайно важной и грядет, и хочется привлечь к ней заранее внимание. 13 декабря весь цивилизованный мир будет вспоминать одну из наиболее жестоких и трагических страниц в истории Китая. Массовую резню, которая унесла жизни сотен тысяч мирных жителей китайского города Нанкина. С тех пор эта дата, 13 декабря 1937 года, стала символом бесчеловечности, варварства японского милитаризма. Это чудовищная трагедия, как и преступления нацистских карателей на территории Советского Союза, навсегда останутся в памяти народов как неопровержимое свидетельство цены, которую приходится платить за попустительство той человеконенавистнической идеологии, которая ставит цели нации вне закона и считает их, ну, буквально, что ли, исключительными по сравнению с теми, кого они полагают недочеловеками. Опять же, их прямая цитата. Неопровержимая историческая правда о событиях в Нанкине была юридически установлена и закреплена в приговорах Международного военного трибунала для Дальнего Востока. Он действовал с 1946 по 1948 года. И Нанкинского трибунала по военным преступлениям 1947 года. Эти вердикты, равно как и решения Нюрнбергского трибунала, составляют нерушимый фундамент послевоенного мироустройства и современного международного порядка. Любые попытки поставить их под сомнение, реабилитировать нацизм и милитаризм, пересмотреть итоги Второй мировой войны и преуменьшить масштабы совершенных злодеяний являются абсолютно неприемлемыми и подлежат решительному осуждению со стороны всего международного сообщества. Россия как страна из двух административно-территориальных образований, энтитетов Республики Сербской и Федерации БИК, наделенных самыми широкими конституционными полномочиями в практических областях. Воевавшие друг с другом мусульмане-башняки, сербы, хорваты получили Монумент авторства российского скульптора Баскакова будет установлен силами Российского военно-исторического общества. Иван Андреевич Остерман, сын сподвижника Петра Великого, Андрея Ивановича Остермана. Он начал дипломатическую карьеру в 1757 году в Париже. В 1760 был назначен чрезвычайным посланником и полномочным министром в Стокгольме. За успешную деятельность в Швеции в 1772 году награжден орденом святого Александра Невского. Впоследствии участвовал в заключении морских конвенций Российской империи с государствами, поддержавшими декларацию императрицы Екатерины II о вооруженном нейтралитете 1780 года, союзных оборонительных договоров со Священной Римской империей 1792 год, Пруссии 1792 год, Британии 1795, а также торговых договоров с рядом европейских стран. В период с 1775 по 1796 года был вице-канцлером, с 1796 по 1797 был канцлером Российской империи, награжден многими орденами, в том числе высшими. Он скончался в Москве, похоронен в семейной усыпальнице рода Остерманов при Троицкой церкви села Красная Сапожковская района Рязанской области. На выставке в историческом особняке дом графа Остермана будут представлены редкие экспонаты 18-го, начала 19 веков, включая живописные работы из фондов Третьяковской галереи, Государственного исторического музея, Государственного музея изобразительных искусств имени Пушкина. Личные вещи представителей рода Остерманов, атрибуты дворянского костюма, образцы ювелирных изделий, фарфора и хрусталя с вензелями императриц. Экспозиции воссоздают интерьеры рабочего кабинета канцлера. Документальную основу выставки составят копии уникальных документов архива внешней политики Российской империи, Министерства иностранных дел нашей страны, которые рассказывают о деятельности Остермана на дипломатическом поприще. Мероприятия примут участие в целом ряде этих мероприятий, примут участие руководители федеральных, региональных министерств и ведомств, представители администрации президента Российской Федерации, Российское военно-историческое общество. И вы знаете, не поверите, но я готова ответить на ваши вопросы. С нами ли международная жизнь?
Добрый вечер, Мария Владимировна.
Да, здравствуйте.
Вот, как бы незаметно, но тем не менее, прошел уже целый год с момента смены власти в Сирии. Вот хотелось бы услышать комментарии, ваши оценки относительно нынешнего состояния российско-сирийских отношений.
Ну, Сирия является традиционно для нашей страны важным партнером в регионе Ближнего Востока. История двусторонних отношений насчитывает не один десяток лет, и на протяжении всего этого времени связи между странами носили взаимовыгодный характер, основывались на принципах дружбы, уважения, учета интересов друг друга. Россия всегда приходила на помощь сирийскому народу, когда он в этом нуждался. Мы видим, что сейчас сирийцам также требуется поддержка, прежде всего в деле восстановления народного хозяйства, которое серьезно пострадало в результате затяжного внутреннего военно-политического кризиса. Готовы оказывать такое содействие. Российские компании обладают необходимыми для этого возможностями, опытом. В настоящее время официальные контакты между нашими странами носят, вы, наверное, знаете, интенсивный характер, налажен регулярный делегационный обмен. 15 октября, например, в Москве состоялись переговоры президента Российской Федерации и президента Сирии. По их итогам был подтвержден обоюдный настрой на развитие многопланового двустороннего взаимодействия в новых условиях. В соответствии с достигнутым пониманием 28 октября в Москве было проведено заседание постоянной российско-сирийской комиссии по торгово-экономическому и научно-техническому сотрудничеству. А в период с 15 по 19 ноября российская делегация во главе с сопредседателем межправкомиссии, министром строительства, жилищно-коммунального хозяйства Российской Федерации, господином Файзулиным, посетила Сирию, и в ходе состоявшихся контактов представители российских и сирийских ведомств наметили ориентиры для дальнейшей совместной работы по целому ряду перспективных направлений. А диалог с участием профильных ведомств, экономических операторов двух стран будет продолжен.
Большое спасибо. Еще один вопрос, с вашего позволения. Вот недавно во Франции с подачи главы государства Эммануэля Макрона стал набирать обороты дискуссия вокруг идеи маркировки средств массовой информации по принципу их, ну, в кавычках, естественно, достоверности и в подаче информации имеется в виду. И якобы это должно помочь в борьбе с дезинформацией, различными гибридными угрозами. Вот что вы думаете по поводу этой идеи? Нет ли здесь попытки сегрегировать средства массовой информации на хорошие и плохие?
Вы знаете, я хочу просто напомнить, что подобные попытки и вообще идеи витали где-то в районе Елисейских полей уже давно. И поэтому все это происходит не впервые. Другое дело, что все время Франция, я имею в виду устами своих лидеров, называет себя прогрессивной и свободолюбивой, а вот дела и конкретные шаги почему-то говорят о другом. Посмотрите, несколько лет назад эту идею продвигали под вывеской так называемых белых списков средств массовой информации. И так же, как сейчас, рассказывали, что создание подобных реестров благонадежно, как там говорилось, средств массовой информации, поможет в борьбе с распространением фейков. Между тем, уже тогда на экспертном уровне экспертное сообщество, общественность отреагировали на эту концепцию волной критики. Критика эта была направлена в адрес тех, кто предлагал, это были официальные власти, а критиковали в основном за то, что под вроде бы предлогом борьбы с дезинформацией на самом деле проводится политика, которая сводится к отходу от что те медиаоператоры, которые часто занимаются журналистской деятельностью, добросовестно выполняют нормы законодательства и профессиональной этики, но при этом по каким-то причинам не смогут пройти так называемый фейс-контроль со стороны Елисейского дворца, либо лояльных ему НПО, будут априори позиционироваться как маргинальные или, например, вредоносные, или, ну и дальше можно этот ряд продолжать. Здесь по определению не может быть какой-то, очевидно, не может быть какой-то позитивной, как они ее называют, дискриминации. Принудительная маркировка неизбежно сведется к стигматизации неугодных средств массовой информации. А вот мы так и понимаем, что именно этого добивается Макрон и вся его команда, которым нужно установить контроль над национальным информационным пространством, которых иностранные интернет-ресурсы, согласно ультралиберальным установкам. Французские правоохранители стремятся получить российские компьютерные данные в обход компетентных министерств и ведомств, руководствуясь, очевидно, известными положениями вот той самой вредной Будапештской конвенции по компьютерным преступлениям. Это статья 326. Я хотела бы отметить, что в Париже игнорируют обращения российских правоохранительных органов по вопросам противодействия распространению террористических и экстремистских материалов, высказываний в интернете. Могли бы, если, допустим, действительно решились бороться с терроризмом и экстремизмом в сети или с какими-то деструктивными проявлениями, могли бы, например, наладить конструктивное взаимодействие. А вместо этого, вместо какого-либо технического взаимодействия по компьютерным инцидентам, представители Франции и в Организации Объединенных Наций, и в ОБСЕ регулярно тиражируют русофобские обвинения, абсолютно бездоказательные, голословные, и навязывают другим государствам политическую атрибуцию компьютерных атак. Вот хотел бы также обратить ваше внимание на тот факт, что французские дипломаты яростно сопротивлялись, например, согласованию обязательств по борьбе с распространением противоправной информации в ходе переговоров по Конвенции ООН против киберпреступности 22-24 года. Прикрывались они лозунгами приверженности защиты свободы слова. Тогда, интересно, да? То есть, когда дело доходило до конкретной работы, нет, они от этой работы уходили, говорили, что свобода слова священна, и ничего, что могло бы потенциально ее ограничить, недопустимо.
Forgot to mention a single Russian correspondent murdered by the Kiev regime, military correspondent, or so on. We will be sure to post the links to that story in today's text of the briefing, because no one has forgotten about it. That is the organization Reporters Without Borders, who conducted activity and who did not do anything that was tied to journalism, was recognized as undesirable in Russia. How could they say that they're protecting journalists if they turn a blind eye to the killings of journalists? And it's very easy to understand how
Неблагонадежных средств массовой информации при таком жюри. И на фоне этих и других хронических проблем с обеспечением беспрепятственного доступа к информации, свободой выражения мнений, Париж, тем не менее, не забывает высокомерно разглагольствовать о ситуации с медиасвободами в других странах, сыпать разного рода поручениями, поучениями, кому как жить, что кому делать, в том числе в адрес России. И почему-то там продолжает вы знаете, я не знаю, правда, что сейчас циркулирует в информационном пространстве Армении. Я могу сказать о том, как это есть на самом деле. Армения остается полноправной
game of words that apparently CSTO has left Armenia, or Armenia is supposedly leaving what the leadership of Armenia is talking about, or the so-called representatives of this country. I'm simply painting the real picture. Armenia remains a full-fledged member. It has never withdrawn from the organizations. As for the suspension of participation, that's another game of words, because there is no such phrasing in the legal base. According to the charter, any member state has the right to withdraw from organization according to the established order if the state does not fulfill its obligations within the organization, concluding due to the debt with the organization in 2 years. It could face certain measures, as the rebuttal of right of promoting its citizens to the quota positions in the organization, as well as losing the voting rights in the organization. But similar measures are applied in the UN system. Thank you. Thank you. Is Izvestia with us? Madam Zakharova. Good evening. It's Izvestia. Our question has to deal with Japan, who refused the proposal of the EU countries to use the frozen assets of Russia, amounting to about $30 billion. And the same was done by the US, so we wanted to know your opinion. How could we see it as a positive trend, the refusal of states to pillage Russia at the request of the European Union? And how will this affect the situation in the EU and their assets? From the comments of the official Tokyo, as for the online meeting of ministers of finance of the G7 that took place on December 7th, it's not apparent that Japan changed drastically their position on the, as they claim, frozen assets, but we use different words, stolen Russian assets. And that is also clear from the statements of the head of the Japanese financial agency at the press conference as a result of this event. Moreover, the Japanese, as the participants of the G7, adopted a joint statement which underscores the opportunity to use Russian means blocked by the Western jurisdictions in order to support the Kiev regime. We repeatedly warned everyone, including the Japan, that their involvement in illegitimate experiments with sovereign assets of Russian Federation will be considered as the participation in the theft and crimes of the Kiev regime. And this will provoke countermeasures, including the asymmetrical ones. And the reaction of Tokyo is another proof that the EU and other members of the EU have very Russophobic nature, and their propaganda are absolutely illegitimate. And other EU member states understand it, who continue not only to speak, but also to fight against such illegal approaches, because they understand that this pressure of this party of expropriators that appeared among the EU in order to impose a defeat on Russia is nothing but a preparation for committing an actual crime. And that is an overt preparation for the whole world to see. And it's clear that those who've cooked it up have no care for the interests of their citizens, nor consequences for the region, for the Western Europe, for the world as a whole. They have no care for their own reputation, although it's unclear what remains of their reputation. They have no care for the economy of the European Union states. And they have no care for potential risks of the global financial system. It's nothing but an order that they are implementing, like Terminator, destroying everything in its wake. Who pays for that? How will the situation unfold afterwards? As for the responsibility, they have no care for that. Once again, let me reiterate, any steps with Russian assets by the EU and their allies will not remain without our response. The responsibility for any negative consequences for the international economy will be paid by the initiators of this fraudulent scheme. The European Commission tries to paint the picture of the legality of the theft of Russian assets to involve the G7 states in their schemes.
This system, not all the Western countries share this illegitimate intention of European Democrats because they are afraid of reputation risk. They understand that the whole world follows how they are being dragged into this criminal affair. So this cautious reaffirms that they are all the criminal ideas of the European Commission to prolong the existence of the Kiev regime and to retain the corruption schemes afloat. The disruption of the business and other global financial system, they can do it. They do not care about this. They are committing a kind of a suicide. We believe that many people in the West have an objective assessment of what is happening. In particular, such steps can affect the stability of the European zone, the attractiveness of the EU jurisdiction for foreign investors, first from Asia and Middle East. I would like to recall that any violations of the international law is not just a robbery, but their blocking and their banning contradicts the norms of international law enshrined in the UN Charter, the principle of sovereign equality of the states, and the UN Convention on Jurisdiction Immunity of the States of their Property of 2004. So we don't see any positive progress or any positive attitude from Tokyo. It's immature. We have not received any signals from Tokyo yet. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Xinhua with us? Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Vladimirovna, Madam Zakharova. Next year, there will be celebrating the 30th establishment of the Russia-China relations of strategic interaction and partnership. What is your assessment? What significant importance has this model of relations, which exists for more than 30 years, in the current unstable international relations, and how our countries will take advantage of this agreement in order to deepen our strategic interaction? Amid unstable geopolitical turbulent situation, the Russia-China relations of a comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction are consistently developing, underpinned by a legal institutional framework, a mechanism of contacts at all levels. They are self-sufficient. They are immune to some external pressure, and the foreign political couple of Moscow and Beijing have become a stabilizing factor in international affairs. The main driving force in this is the diplomacy of leaders under the leadership of the President of Russia and the President of China. Our relations have reached an unprecedented level for the benefit of the two nations. The special character of bilateral political dialogue makes it possible to successfully implement practical cooperation and humanitarian ties. I believe we should confirm this in practice as well. Since 2010, China has become the first among the countries of our foreign trade partners. Russia ranks 5th among partners of China. We have achieved many achievements in many domains. I cannot list all of them, but we tell about them very often. Of course, the sides had made a great deal of job over the past 30 years since the establishment of the strategic interaction and partnership. So this model of bilateral ties has been supplemented with a value in order to underline their qualitative growth. What is important that we have retained interconnected national interests of Russia and China, who are sincerely seeking to develop interstate relations on a multifaceted level, and the development of both our states is underpinned by respect to its partners, allies, to the other world, to the fundamental principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter. And of course, it is still relevant, and I'm talking about the fundamental principles of the Treaty on Good Neighborliness, Friendship and Cooperation signed in July 16, 2001 by the President of the Russian Federation and the President of China. Good neighborliness, friendship, cooperation, mutual respect of the sovereignty and territorial integrity, non-intrusion in domestic affairs, equality and mutual benefit, peaceful coexistence. All this is a guarantee of the Russia-Chinese ties and made it possible for many years to ensure the atmosphere of mutual understanding, deep trust, and firm mutual support. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Reiter with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We're here and we have two questions to you. The first one you've partly answered, but the first one is about, if you don't mind, the new Strategy of National Security of the United States, signed by Donald Trump, calling to revive the Monroe Doctrine that views the Western Hemisphere as an influence zone of Washington. So in this regard, whether Russia has its own zone of influence and what countries of the region it includes. We have already made a comment and in detail on this document. You can see it on the website. But I can add that the relevant stories are being heard to the so-called amendment of Mr. Roosevelt, who pronounced the right of Washington to interfere in Latin America, and I quote, under the pretext of stabilizing the domestic economic situation of any country of the world. And of course, it's alarming amid the current tensions unleashed by Pentagon in Venezuela. And we need to consider whose economic situation is more resilient. I believe that in the absence of outside pressure, embargo, it's a question which system is more resilient, whether this is Biden's economy the moment that Trump put it, the moment to save America, or the situation in Venezuela, which despite the sanctions and embargo and pressure developed and quite actively. Of course, this is alarming amid, as I've said, the current tensions, and we believe that the White House will manage to refrain from sliding to a full-fledged format that can lead to unprecedented repercussions for the whole Western Hemisphere. Russia does not claim any influence zones. Our foreign policy builds on other principles, such as I've already listed them in my answer to the Chinese question. This is the respect for the sovereignty, sovereign equality, mutual benefit, indivisible security, and so on. Thank you very much. In my second question, on frozen Russian assets. And you today talked about the fact that Russia will respond if these assets are used. But maybe you can say something more specific. What specific acts is Russia going to take? The answer will be tough. And the president of the Russian Federation, during the press conference on the 27th of November this year, after the state visit to Kyrgyzstan, to the CSTO summit, I can reiterate that the countermeasures are being developed by our government. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Media Corporation China with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have one question about China. In November, the trade of China demonstrates growth, and among new foreign countries registered in China increased by 15%, and in 2026, the implementation of a 15th five-year plan to advance high-quality development of China. What are your assessments about this development model of China in terms of its advancement towards openness, and what are the opportunities for deepening the Russia-China cooperation for the near future? You are aware that over the recent years, the Russia-China practical ties have been enhanced. The Chinese statistics show that over the past 11 months of this year, the bilateral
200 миллиардов долларов. При этом расчеты между нашими странами практически полностью переведены на национальные валюты. В текущем году на полях встреч на высшем, на высоком уровне заключены крупномасштабные договоренности в энергетической сфере. Подписаны новые межправительственные соглашения по поощрению инвестиций, документы по экспорту сельскохозяйственной продукции, углублению кооперации в области космоса. Россия удерживает первое место по объему поставок в КНР нефти и газа. Достигнутые нашими странами успехи подтверждают эффективность равноправного, уважительного отношения друг к другу, готовность учитывать взаимные интересы, создавать комфортные условия для совместной деятельности. Благодаря этому российско-китайская экономическая связка вносит важный вклад в благоприятное развитие наших стран и также вклад в мировую экономику. Мы исходим из того, что в дальнейшем двустороннее практическое взаимодействие будет всесторонне углубляться, и на реализацию данной задачи ориентированы решения, которые принимались как в Москве, так и в Пекине, и совместно, и в национальном качестве. А что касается реализации 15-го пятилетнего плана КНР, уверены, что в полной мере будет способствовать процветанию дружественного китайского народа и интенсивному развитию российско-китайских экономических связей.
Спасибо большое.
Спасибо вам. С нами Лебалт Ньюс.
Да, здравствуйте, Мария Владимировна. Спасибо за возможность задать вопрос.
Генпрокуратура России взыскала с Латвии 30 миллиардов рублей за изъятие Дома Москвы в Риге. Активы ряда латвийских юридических лиц, находящиеся в российской юрисдикции, будут обращены в доход государства. Вразумят ли такие шаги западники?
Genocide and punishment for it of 1948. On the 8th of December, this decision was published on the website of the International Court in UN, along with the press release. The UN Court is the supreme body acting on the Charter of the United Nations. It cannot be interfered and mixed up with the structures such as the International Criminal Court or the European Court on Human Rights, which acts on the basis of agreements that the Russian Federation has not signed. Apart from the International Court and European Court, which discredited itself by illegitimate actions, the UN International Court keeps being objective. Let me recall you that last year the court denied 3 appeals of Ukraine on racial discrimination, fight against terrorism and genocide, undermining the plans of the West to seek legal recognition of Russia as an aggressor and a sponsor of terrorism. This case was denied by the court, and I refer to the requests of Ukraine in terms of the SMO. The decision delivered in February 2024, one question was left outstanding on the evidence that Ukraine committed genocide in Donbass. In November 2024, Russia submitted to the court the evidence amounting to over 100 pages, and we will continue to work on this track. We will continue to provide evidence and physical evidence. And Ukraine also made a counter-request covering other violations of the Convention, including complicity in genocide, incitement to genocide, assassination of genocide, non-adoption of measures to prevent the punishment for genocide. So the scope of this case has been significantly expanded, including all crimes of the Kiev regime and its collaborators. As for the counter-requests, they were denied by the court, so the cause, which was started as an attempt to demonize Russia for violation of the Genocide Convention, has become a trial over the Ukrainian regime, who committed atrocities against the Russian-speaking population in Donbass. And this is not a kind of a disrupted system. This is the adoption of an international standing of the Russian position. And the West tries to put pressure, including on the UN International Court. This can be shown by the intervention of the 33 states that rally around in favor of this constitution, but about 1/3 of them have already withdrew from this process. We need to stay unbiased, and I'm talking about the International UN Court, which has a great responsibility to maintain international stability, and everyone needs to remember that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Len Teru with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have one question to you. Financial Times said that the US can withdraw from NATO and can start a rapprochement with Russia. What are your assessments on that? We have already made our assessments on this data leakage in the mass media of the West on various aspects of the Ukrainian crisis. I think this is a kind of another speculation. Moreover, this media outlet has already produced fake news, and I think that the United States are not going to withdraw from NATO. They are going to become even closer to the NATO members with the next financial or economic interests to collect. The United States is more interested in NATO. We use it like a tool to get money. I think that it's not beneficial to the United States to withdraw from NATO because this is the source of funding for them. I don't know why and for what reasons this newspaper released such an article. I don't see any reasons and any evidence to that.
Sure. Thank you so much. Is Anna Dalu with us? Yes, good evening. We have two questions. First has to do with the Ukrainian crisis. Does Russia plan any temporary measures as the ceasefire due to the New Year's or Christmas? Our peace initiatives and efforts are well known. And for a long time, with facts, we speak that in order to establish peace, we need to eradicate the root causes of the Ukrainian conflict and stop supporting the criminal, corrupted Kiev regime. And the sooner people realize that, the sooner we can resolve the situation. If it happens before the New Year's, on the New Year's, or on Christmas, we can do nothing but welcome it. But all the talking about the elements of peaceful resolution that don't have the long-term resolution in mind, but only try to cover the desire to prolong the violence and to cover the terrorist acts are unnecessary. Perhaps someone needs them. Perhaps someone gets money for it, but those who are truly oriented for peace, and we believe that, of course, we're the ones who need peace. We don't need such empty words. And the second question for Moldova. Last week, the Prime Minister of Moldova stated that the ambassador of Russia, Ozerov, is not accredited. But supposedly allows to react to incidents of the UAVs in Moldova. Could you comment on the situation? Not only can I do it, I will do it gladly. We've repeatedly commented on this situation. The situation with different UAVs that magically appear untouched in Moldova. And we've talked about the status of our ambassador, Mr. Ozerov. Any kind of proof of Russian nature of the UAVs found in Moldova of being Russian was given by the authorities. And why, if before that we could guess, now it's obvious, because they have no proof. Now, as for Mr. Ozerov, we've already talked about all of this, but we will repeat ourselves. On October 24th, 2024, he presented letters of credence to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Moldova. He received the accreditation card and exerts his function according to the Vienna Convention of Diplomatic Relations of 1964. So supposedly Mr. Montano means that he has still not presented the original of letters of credence to the head of state, but that's not his fault. The ceremony has been postponed by Moldovan authorities for over a year. Meanwhile, ambassadors of other states who have arrived to Moldova after Mr. Ozerov have already handed over the original copies, and that is the flagrant violation by Chisinau of the Vienna Convention. that supersedes the order of the handing in of the letters that is decided by the date and the time of the arrival of ambassadors. And I'd really like for Prime Minister to know about this and to comment on it. Now that he does, can he please do it? Perhaps it will be a revelation that there is such a thing as Vienna Conventions. Because now Prime Minister Montano has to ask a question to the President Sandu. How is it that she's violating the Vienna Convention and thus ruining the reputation of Moldova once again? As for the characteristics given to the ambassador, there is no audacity in the actions of our ambassador. He correctly, diplomatically explains the official position of Russia on the issues of bilateral and international agenda, maintaining contacts with central and local authorities, with public organizations, with our compatriots and diplomatic corps. Similar functions are exerted by the ambassador of Moldova in Russia, Lilian Dari, and no one retorts him for that, and no one creates any obstacles on his way. As for why these characteristics are given by Moldovan authorities, we understand. The reason is simple, the anti-Russian nature, and it is obvious. Russophobic rhetorics is a tested measure of receiving European credits, without which they're facing a collapse. It's not an anti-Russian propaganda. They underscore that it is their politics that create problems for their external trade and connections. And this is also their destructive actions in their internal policy. And the refusal to conduct any relations with Russia will not be compensated by their relations with European nations, so they do not expect any progress. And what's important, they expect worse results, and it seems they have different goals, they have different plans, and secondly, they should probably deal with their own life, considering their economic situation. So when it comes to building a strategic course on providing this assistance, they have no energy or desire. And the figures speak for themselves. After the first half of 2025, the Moldovan export lowered by 5.7%, including to the European countries by 4%. The volume of direct foreign investments into the economy of Moldova has lowered by 42% compared to the figures of 2022. The deficit of trade balance has reached $6 billion, and external and internal borrowings have reached 38% of GDP. And now they're covering the debt. So it's not surprising that the budget for 2026 will be facing a deficit of 20%, and 83% of the youth plan to leave the country. We regret that the Moldovan authorities continue to use Russophobia as a measure of resolving their issues, because the European example shows that it doesn't solve, it creates and multiplies existing problems. Thank you. Thank you. Is Almaydin with us? Good evening, Madam Zakharova. The visit of the delegation of the UN Security Council, including the Russian representative to Lebanon and Syria, was dedicated to the issues of regional stability, security, and the implementation of the subsequent UN resolution. What is Russia's assessment of the results of this visit? I believe it would be untimely to give any assessments or make any statements. Let's await the official commentary of the President of the UN Security Council, Slovenia. That's their mandate to give these assessments to their missions, and then we will do the same. Perhaps our permanent representative, Nebenza, will do it, or perhaps through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but let's give the floor to those who should be given an assessment of this visit. Thank you. Is Newsfront with us? Yes, good evening. One question, if you allow, with a sub-question. On the Ukrainian territory, there are still biolaboratories sponsored by the US. Are there any contacts with the American side on the necessity of closing these objects in order to avoid any risks of biosecurity? Perhaps this issue should be included in the plan of resolving the conflict. And the sub-question, do you think it's possible that with the new US administration there could be a discussion between Russia and the US on the renewal of the Convention of working out and preserving the biotoxic weapons of 1962, as well as working out of the controlling mechanisms of the global biosecurity? You see, our countries, not for the first year, but for a long time, has presented the issue openly and openly expresses concern, doing it in the profile international forums, such as the General Committee of the UN, Convention of the limitation of working out, producing, and stockpiling the bacteriological, biological, toxic arms, in line with the military biological activity led by the US in the laboratory of the former USSR republics, including in Ukraine. Especially because during the special military operation, we revealed the facts of implementing these programs. Until right now, our thought-out questions to the US and Ukraine remain without answer. We also heard from Victoria Nolan, who addressed the US lawmakers, and she openly admitted that there are these questions, and we are committed to continue to the next meeting of the CSTO in Geneva in December 15-17 from American and Ukrainian side to resolve the situation in order to remove this aggravation. And we believe that the US, who are one of the depositories of the convention, will provide relevant questions, relevant answers to all the answers that were already addressed to them. And this scenario confirms the necessity of coordinated actions of the international community as a whole in order to strengthen the regime of the convention. Main priorities on this track are the resumption of negotiations on universal, legally binding, non-discriminatory protocol of CSTO, with the effective mechanism of checking its implementation, as well as the close implementation of the member states of obligations on the convention on national level. We will continue our close cooperation with our allies in order to launch this consolidated work. Thank you. Is Rudolph with us? Is Rudolph with us?
Не слышно.
We cannot hear you.
Сейчас слышно. Продолжайте, пожалуйста.
Now we can hear you. Please continue.
Sorry for this interruption. My first question is that, has Russia officially allowed former Syrian President Bashar Assad to be able to move the way he wants? Have you officially announced his relocation or not? Thanks.
Вы знаете, ваша постановка...
You see the way you ask this question. It's incorrect. Because what kind of limitations are you talking about? Perhaps you have some information or additional data you can share. Please send it over. Perhaps someone made it up. I have no idea what limitations you're talking about. I would like to reiterate what Russia has stated on all levels, repeatedly and openly. Bashar al-Assad was given refugee on humanitarian reasons. No limitations that were supposedly imposed. I'm unaware of this. So if you have any information, please pass it over.
Second question is that Iran has not allowed International Atomic Agency inspectors to visit the nuclear sites after the June war. Have you discussed this topic with Iranian side to allow them, since some European officials have said that, quote, if Iran does not allow them, they will put more sanctions on Iran. Also, as Russia, do you trust the neutrality of the agency about Iranian nuclear program?
I would like to just clear up that the verifying action of IAEA in Iran also took place after the US-Israeli aggression. Subsequent events were carried out at the NPP Bushehr as well as on other objects that weren't the target of the attack back then. As we know, Iranian side considered the possibility of the enhancement of the verifiable operation of the agency, and conditions for that should have been created by the agreement between Iran and IAEA concluded in Cairo on September 9th. At the same time, the opponents of Tehran were not satisfied with that. Of course, the IAEA activity in Iran has a very specific nature, which is the direct consequence of June's attack on objects under the IAEA control. Let's look at the facts, and they are that the criminal and reckless actions of Washington in the Western Jerusalem, they not only put the whole region on the brink of a large-scale catastrophe with serial radiological and humanitarian consequences, but torpedo implementation of verificational measures supposed by the agreement between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the IAEA on the comprehensive guarantees. We have to pay our dues that, despite the external threats and constant attacks from different kinds of unfriendly states, the Iranian side preserves firm position and continues to follow the obligations under the treaty as well as the agreement on the guarantees. And the IAEA inspections in Iran could be conducted, but they also require the decision of the Higher Council of National Security, and we operate on the assumption that the agency will use the existing capabilities and will continue the constructive cooperation with Tehran without following the provocations of those who openly seeks pretext for a new aggression. We also note regular statements of the Director General of the IAEA, Mr. Grossi, that the agency does not have, nor has ever had, the information of the Iran carrying out nuclear arms. And we believe that this assessment removes the sense of efforts of those countries who try to gain political capital on the supposed threat of Iranian nuclear program.
Do you see Kurdistan region in Iraq as a suitable place for your companies to be working at? What about Iraq? What are your concerns in both places?
Ну, вы же, наверное, знаете, что российские компании давно...
As you know, Russian companies have been working in Iraq, including the Kurds Autonomic Region. Joint projects are being implemented, including the oil and gas sector, and we believe that this action will continue despite the non-stop sanction pressure of our country from the West. As for the so-called Syrian Kurdistan, I would like to recall that Russia consequently advocates for the return of northeast Syria to Syrian state, and we also call on the resolution of all the debatable issues for respect of territorial integrity of Syria, and according to our principal position, the relevant issues of territorial agenda, including the business cooperation, are discussed by Russia within the official contexts between the leaders of Syria. And in this regard, we use the mechanism of constant Russian-Syrian mechanism of trade, economic, and technical cooperation, the meeting of which took place in Moscow on the 28th of October of this year.
and have a nice day.
Вам тоже.
Thank you so much. For you as well. Is the embassy life with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Good evening, Ambassador Life. We have two questions. Will there be any additional diplomatic steps towards countries that, according to Moscow, are directly or indirectly responsible for such attacks? You see, very briefly, at the beginning I've already commented on this. I mean, when I answered the question of your colleague from Newsfront, and I believe that it is very important to take a look at this issue, even in a more open manner. On the agenda, it's not just reaching another temporary peace that Zelensky demanded, saying that Istanbul negotiations are unnecessary. We need this peace offering. But after that, we found out that this was another pretext to ask for arms and dislocation.
To attract people in these attacks held by Bankova, these truces we've honored, but they were violated by the Kiev regime. So right now, what is needed is to eliminate the root causes of the conflict, and only that's the way to ensure a lasting peace. Currently, everyone is discussing the relevant tracks that can become a part of the peace deal. We've heard these proposals. And of course, these talks are following the Alaska summit. They are following and developing the ideas reached during the summit. And as for the truce, once again, if you don't mind, I'll make a couple of examples on how it was previously. This year, we've announced 3 truces of such kind. The so-called energy truce, March 17th until March 18th until April 17th. Do you remember how many times it was violated by the Ukrainian army? 136 times. The same as the Russia proposed truce, Easter truce. On the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War. So how many times these truces were violated? They were violated for Easter 4,900 times by the Kiev regime. And as for the victory, $14,043 times violations by the Kiev regime. And of course, we see these Russophobic actors in West Europe resent to any diplomatic initiatives could bring closer peace in view account of Russia's interest. They continue to lie, cynically lie to their citizens that the war unleashed by themselves against our country is a kind of economically beneficial venture that will cost nothing to the Europeans. Yes, indeed, it brings fruit, but rotten fruit to the Europeans. I believe that their lies will be revealed and no one would say that he doesn't understand what's going on. All citizens of the West will wake up to the idea that they are funding it through their taxes. Right now, the overwhelming majority recognizes this, but the citizens are being like zombies because they cut off of any other alternative sources of mass media or undergo a kind of marking of into reliable or unreliable media. So the responsibility is on those world elites who flared up conflict in Ukraine, who conducted operations to meddling in domestic affairs, invented coup d'etats, and then engaged in the open conflict this region, dragged it. On the eve of Christmas, what is your assessment of the prospects of real truce or start of direct talks with Ukraine in the near future, taking into account the ongoing hostilities? I think I've just answered to this question. Yes, I just want to ask you on specific terms. On the eve of the Christmas, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Russia, what can wish to all people of the world? What are your wishes? On the eve of Christmas, I will convey the wishes, but if you don't mind, I'll make it a bit later. I think we didn't install even the Christmas tree. So we will be happy to share our congratulations with you. Is author E with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Thank you very much, and I convey your thanks from Georgia. I'm at the international competition Gold Feather, and Ramzan Kadyrov awarded prizes to the prizes. He welcomed all the journalists. So everyone sends you greetings from this event. Thank you very much. Can today we say that the crisis in Ukraine has buried the model of the European security in its post-war model? And does Russia see any prospects for establishing a new security architecture in Europe with the participation of the collective West? I believe that this crisis in Ukraine not only buried the European security model, but evidenced that manipulation used by the West with the terms like European security, the mechanisms established to support it, led to the global collapse of all the innovations that should have ensured this security. This is another interconnection. Ukraine just highlighted the situation as it is. And to answer your question, it can seem that the situation in Ukraine emerged just overnight. But that's not the case. This process has its own roots and consequences. This was a chain of manipulations that took place on the European continent under the slogans of human rights, freedoms. The West continued work on establishing new or invent the old hotbeds of tension, interfere in domestic affairs, topple the governments for the benefit of the Western states, and establishing and forging the relations based not like on the principles of mutual benefit, but established along the principle of metropolis, colonies, and related notions of colonialism that reigned in the world over 100 years, and it should have gone, but nevertheless, the ideology revived. So I believe that we can treat it this way. But in general, I believe that I would bring your attention to the article written by Sergei Lavrov, released in the Russian newspaper on the destiny of on the OC, where he described the mechanism of manipulations led to this crisis. It's not only about the OC that is the main perpetrator of the crisis of the European security. This is a specific example, and the path it followed, and I'm talking about the emergence of the crisis. What risks the Minister of Foreign Affairs sees as key risks for the global system? Uncontrolled escalation, endless wars unleashed across Russia's borders, global mass economic shocks, or loss of control over international institutes due to their politicized nature. All the risks supplemented by hybrid threats. Old dialogues remain, and I'm talking about the supremacy of a group of states, neocolonialism. They want to establish in various domains, economy, science, technologies, distribution of resources, governance over energy flows. This is an old problem, but nevertheless, the new challenges and opportunities they use to implement it, they resort to implement it. And I think that's a deep philosophical question, but the outlines you've just mentioned and highlighted. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Thank you. And you too. Are there any other questions? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Yes, I'm listening. Голос Отечества. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Shalikhov Oleg, and we have two questions. Ambassador at Large Rodion Miroshnik said that Russia is ready to resume the Istanbul talks if there is a relevant framework. What does Russia consider as a framework for this? The draft memorandum or maybe something else? I think we need to remember that we have the relevant decisions adopted by the President of the Russian Federation on entitling Mr. Medinsky with the mandate to hold talks on such level. And we need to be guided, first and foremost, by the comments of Mr. Medinsky in the capacity, in this capacity, entitled to him, assigned to him by the President. Of course, this work engages the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, other agencies, executive and legislative authorities participate in this process. As for the prospects and the formats and the terms for resuming the talks, I think these statements should come from the person authorized to deliver such statements. On the other hand, Mr. Medinsky and others have already mentioned the terms of our terms and obligations, echoed by Sergei Lavrov. We'll put on the links of our text briefing to the linking to the interview and statements. Yes, thank you very much. And my second question. A couple of days ago, Richard Moore, the head of the intelligence services of MI6, said that the situation in Ukraine, by doing so, the UK is trying to impact the policy held by Washington. Yes, once again. A couple of days ago, the head of Richard Moore of the British intelligence said that the situation in Ukraine with the situation in Ukraine, the British special services impact the policy led by Washington. And I would like to see your assessment in terms, especially in terms of the peace deal between the United States and Russia. I think it's Washington that should make a comment on that. It would be good if it could reveal some details of this impact. Amid the Ukrainian crisis, when the new administration in Washington takes endeavors in search for a peaceful solution, the UK seeks to echo its leadership, but in the opposite direction. consolidating the determination of the Western minority and Western Europe in rendering blindless support in order to counteract the alleged destructive policy of Moscow and its alleged unprovoked aggression against Ukraine, seek their own plans on inflicting, as they put it, strategic defeat, but in fact they wanted to undermine any peace talks or movements or efforts towards peace. Nothing fits them. It's clear that the British intelligence services, we cannot name them as law enforcement, some special services, are seeking to make in Europe, and even not in Europe and beyond, a kind of a fire to set a fire. So, and in this case, they would earn money, take their benefits, and they've done so on many occasions because they don't have any own resources or developments in outer space or in science and technologies. All this that requires to enter a new era, they don't have enough of such resources. So that's why they are seeking to take advantage, to earn money. That explains their colonial behavior. So I believe that the only source for making advances, I think that's the only explanation. The West used to cherish their glorious past, and that's why I see their desire to dismantle peace talks, undermine them, to prevent any peace in Europe, so that to take its own profit out of this war. And there are no doubts that the British lead in Ukraine. We can remember that in April 2022, the back then Prime Minister Boris Johnson banned Ukraine to sign the already drafted document stating that Ukraine should weaken Russia, that will get weapons, prosecute war with the support of Europe for as long as needed. And that was the UK idea. London is obsessed with the idea to increase stakes at the conflict. They don't want to abandon any ideas that can serve to increase the anti-policy line of the West. As for the negotiation talk process, it's undergoing. Our Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has already reiterated on many occasions, diplomacy is different. It can be public diplomacy. It should be accompanied with information. It should be open, but there should be a kind of diplomacy that should be prosecuted in a silent manner for that it to be effective, in order to not to undermine the processes that are being just outlined. So we prioritize peace. We take every effort to do so. And if anyone has any doubt, then we can recall that we've agreed that about the Minsk agreements and the violation of the Minsk agreements by the West, while we tried to call the global community to honor this treaty, and it was, and I would like to recall that it was a resolution of the United Nations. If you don't have any questions, then I would like to sum up my briefing, to end this briefing. Thank you very much. I wish you success, all the best. Thank you.